Welcome to The Deep Dive, your shortcut to genuinely being well-informed. We take your research, your notes, articles, and we pull out the absolute must-know nuggets. Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating and often sensitive deep dive, the historical roots of anti-Islamism in India. Our mission, guided by the compelling work of Amalendu Misra, is to understand why, despite centuries of shared history, a significant tension persists between the Hindu majority and the Muslim community there. We're going to unpack how historical interpretations have shaped perceptions, explore the diverse and sometimes surprising viewpoints of key Indian nationalist leaders like Vivekananda, Gandhi, and Nehru, and contrast them with the more radical views of figures like Savarkar. And all of this while looking at the powerful, often manipulative influence of British historiography. So what does this all mean for understanding identity and religion in India today? Let's dive in.
Right. So Amalendu Misra starts with this really striking paradox. Muslims have been a significant presence in India for, well, almost 900 years.
900 years.
Yeah, and holding considerable political influence for nearly 700 of those. Yet, for a substantial majority of the Hindu population across India, there's been this persistent difficulty, in fully coming to terms with this coexistence. It's not universal, of course, but it's a deep-seated undercurrent.
Yeah, that foundational tension certainly feels alive in modern debates, doesn't it? We see it in public discussions around, say, the destruction of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya or the rise of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. It really begs the question, why does this difficulty persist? What makes this relationship so complex?
Misra's work really tries to unravel that exact conundrum. He suggests this reluctance among many Hindus to fully reconcile with their past is rooted in three main areas. First, the historical nature of Islam during Muslim rule. Second, a perceived sort of overwhelming disparity between Hinduism and Islam. And crucially, a highly biased interpretation of this complex relationship, largely pushed by British historians.
Okay, that last point. The biased interpretation by British historians. Misra points to that as a core factor. That's a significant claim. How exactly did British historiography play such a crucial role here?
Absolutely. What we see are figures like James Mill, Henry Eliot. These were prominent British historians of their time, and they systematically portrayed Muslim rule as inherently dark and tyrannical.
Dark and tyrannical, wow.
Yeah. And this wasn't just some academic interpretation stuck in scholarly circles. This view was actively pushed through textbooks, schools, universities across India. It basically shaped how generations understood their own history.
So it wasn't just about recording history, it was actively shaping it for, political gain. What was the motive behind this portrayal?
The colonial administration's intent seems pretty clear: to sustain and even accentuate the differences between Hindus and Muslims.
Right.
By doing that, they aimed to make it easier to continue British rule. Lord Dufferin, a viceroy, even went so far as to characterize Muslims by their monotheism, iconoclastic fanaticism, and animal sacrifices, and even by their memory of Muslim supremacy over India, essentially framing them as fundamentally different, potentially threatening.
So it really sounds like a deliberate strategy. Divide and conquer, maybe? Or at least manage a complex population by playing on existing fault lines?
Pretty much.
How deeply did that narrative embed itself?
Oh, deeply. Eliot and Dowson's work, for instance, it conveyed this simple lesson to Hindus. British rule freed you from centuries of Islamic oppression.
Implying
they should therefore offer unquestioning acceptance to the British.
Okay.
And this historical narrative inevitably made Muslims feel alienated, cast as the historical oppressors. And it taught many Hindus to view Muslims with suspicion, like enemies of their religion and ancestors.
So the British clearly played a manipulative hand in shaping these perceptions. But what happened when India's own emerging nationalist leaders had to confront this Muslim question? How did they try to bridge this gap or maybe unintentionally deepen it?
That's where it gets really complex. Initially, there was this sort of general consensus among many early nationalist thinkers that Muslim rule had been bad, maybe, and that Islam was in some ways incompatible with Hinduism. But, they couldn't ignore the huge Muslim population within India.
Right.
Their challenge was figuring out how to forge a common Indian identity. And our sources highlight several very distinct, often contradictory approaches among these key figures.
Okay, where should we start?
Let's start with Vivekananda. He viewed Islam primarily as a force within a power structure. He actually considered it the most threatening religion for Hindus.
That's a truly strong statement from someone so influential. How did he arrive at that conclusion?
Well, he interpreted Muslim rule and the subjugation of Hindus not just as political events. For him, it was a reflection of Hinduism's own spiritual and political decline.
Interesting.
He felt Hinduism lacked a central scripture, which in his view made it seem weak compared to Islam, which got strength from a commonly accepted scripture. He explicitly condemned Islam for establishing its own cultural hegemony at the expense of Hindu or Vedic civilization. And he was quite critical of its propagation through violence. He said, violence to propagate its brand of truth cannot be a true religion.
Okay.
He looked up to figures like Guru Govind Singh and the Marathas as admirable examples of resistance against Islamic power. He even cited an Islamic historian, Farishta, to claim Hindus diminished significantly in number with the advent of Muslims. His consistent call was for Hindus to awaken spiritually to overcome physical weakness, which he saw as a principal cause of India's miseries.
So the core insight for Vivekananda wasn't just theology. He was arguing that Islam, as a force, exposed a fundamental weakness in Hinduism itself, which then became a call for spiritual and political awakening, right? This idea that Hinduism needed to strengthen itself against a perceived external threat. And that's a crucial early threat.
Exactly.
Now let's turn to Gandhi. He's so often associated with Hindu-Muslim unity, but our sources, they paint a far more nuanced picture.
Indeed they do. His lifelong passion for unity did stem partly from his upbringing. He even idolized a Muslim friend, Sheikh Mehtab. His Baniya caste background also likely played a role, as it was maybe less directly affected by Muslim persecution than, say, Brahmins or Kshatriyas. He initially embraced the British lifestyle, but also joined an Islamic students organization, and in South Africa, famously, he invoked Khuda Ishwar, God, in both Muslim and Hindu terms, to try and unite Indians there. However, once back in India, he seemed to selectively use history, emphasizing compassionate rulers rather than just repeating those Dark Age narratives.
And he also famously led the Khilafat movement, didn't he? For listeners who might not know, that was a pan-Islamic cause supporting the Ottoman Caliphate. Seems like a fascinating choice for forging unity against the British in India.
It was a bold move back in the 1920s. A blueprint for a common front.
But controversial.
Highly controversial. His response to the Moplah Rebellion of 1921, for example, that saw really bloodthirsty and blood-curdling violence, forced conversions, temple desecration against Hindus. His response was described by critics as intriguing and absurd.
Why absurd?
He refused to condemn the atrocities, seemingly because he feared it would end Hindu-Muslim unity and jeopardize his political alliances. This particular event, according to Misra's analysis, revealed a deep-seated lack of confidence, perhaps, in Muslim support for a non-Muslim leader.
It sounds like Gandhi was constantly walking this tightrope, trying to balance these incredibly complex forces. But despite his passionate commitment to unity, what were the fundamental reasons, according to Misra's work, that his efforts ultimately fell short of truly bridging that divide?
Well, one key issue was his assertion that my Hinduism includes all that I know is best in Islam. While maybe well-intentioned, this inadvertently alienated Muslims who felt that religion was kind of being subsumed into his Hindu framework. And while he argued that the Prophet's military expedition shouldn't be taken literally and that truth is the exclusive property of no single scripture, his overall criticisms of Islam, when you weigh them against his praise, they far outweigh the praise.
Right.
And crucially, Gandhi infused his political movements, like the famous Dandi March, the Salt March, with overtly Hindu religious symbolism.
How so?
Calling it a yatra, which is a spiritual pilgrimage, aiming to free Mother India, wearing the tilak mark, having Hindu devotional songs, bhajans, sung. This, the Muslim League pointed out, signaled a kind of Hindu dominance. Critics like Judith Brown saw this as manipulation. Others argued it was just a pragmatic way to reach India's incredibly diverse masses, divided by geography and language. But ultimately, the text suggests his overbearing Hindu attitude, perhaps unintentional, hindered true Hindu-Muslim unity.
So Gandhi's approach, despite his unifying intentions, might have inadvertently contributed to the divisions he sought to overcome, largely through integrating Hindu symbolism into these national movements. Okay, shifting gears now. Nehru. In contrast to Gandhi's spiritual leanings, Nehru is often associated with a much more secular vision for India.
Precisely. Nehru, who was both a thinker and a historian himself, really advocated for a humanist approach to history. He directly challenged that British portrayal of Muslim rule as solely dark. He saw Islam in India as having religious, political, and rich cultural dimensions.
Not just one thing.
Exactly.
Good.
He argued the violence of early Muslim invaders was primarily political, rooted in ethno-racial factors rather than purely religious.
Yeah.
Over time, he contended, Muslim kings became as much Indians as the Hindus. There were intermarriages, Hindus served in high offices, leading to little feeling of conqueror and conquered. He often glorified figures like the Mughal Emperor Akbar or the ancient Emperor Ashoka as symbols of religious pluralism and secularism. He suggested Islam's image in India, initially maybe associated with cultural and religious barbarity, later evolved into one of plurality.
Yet even his secularism faced significant challenges, didn't it? It wasn't straightforward.
No, definitely not. While theoretically sound, his secularism was often viewed by many as politically motivated. Muslims frequently perceived it as offering a kind of restricted existence for their distinct identity.
Restricted how?
Well, he criticized elite Muslims, for example, for clinging to past glories. He believed that economic upliftment would naturally make religious divides less important for the masses. But his insistence that all Indians regard India as a motherland, and his use of symbols like the Himalayas and the Ganges, even though they had a nationalistic purpose, they carried a semi-secular message that could easily be misunderstood by Muslims with a different historical memory, a different connection.
Right, those symbols have strong Hindu associations too.
Exactly. Misra's work suggests Nehru knew the Hindus did not entirely approve of his historical narrative either. And ultimately, his efforts to portray a common identity failed to fully convince either community.
So Nehru's secular vision, while forward-thinking, struggled to resonate equally because it didn't fully account for these diverse historical memories and identities. Okay, finally, we turn to Savarkar. His ideas are described as perhaps the most influential for a new generation of Hindus, and certainly among the most radical we've discussed.
Savarkar was really the first systematic thinker, activist, and ideologue to articulate the existence of multiple otherness in the Indian polity. He famously discovered nationalism in studying these threatening others. His nationalism, while it drew from Western movements like Mazzini's in Italy, aimed to provide an entirely indigenous alternative model.
His writing is described as monochromatic, always finding fault in Islam. What was the core of his critique?
That's a very apt description, yeah. He viewed Muslims as a threat more dangerous and insidious than even British rule.
Wow, more dangerous than the British.
That was his view. He squarely blamed Muslim rule for India's economic ruin, the imposition of the religious tax, the jizya, on non-Muslims, forced conversions, and what he called the strangulation of the religious space of the Hindus. He argued that Hinduism, though inclusive, simply never tolerated another faith reigning supreme.
And this ties into his idea of Hindutva.
Correctly.
Yeah.
His definition of Hindutva, which is the foundational ideology of Hindu nationalism, strongly linked national identity to a fatherland and a holy land. This implicitly excluded Muslims and Christians, who might not consider India their sacred religious land in the same specific way.
I see.
He emphasized common blood as a binding factor among Hindus, though he did allow for intermarriage with foreigners if they adopted Hindu culture and saw India as their fatherland and punyabu, or sacred land.
And he also explicitly saw Muslim loyalty as suspect, didn't he? Because of pan-Islamism.
Yes. He pointed to poems by Muhammad Iqbal from around the 1920s and 30s, lines like, "India is ours, the whole world is ours, and under the shadow of swords we have grown up. The crescent scabbard is our national emblem." He used these as ample support for his assumption that Hindus were targets of this pan-Islamism.
Right.
He concluded that Muslim rule had created a permanent and unbridgeable division, and his calls for an undivided India sans Muslims, well, they essentially lean towards the chilling concept of ethnic cleansing.
So the key takeaway from Savarkar is this stark, exclusionary vision of India where Muslim identity was fundamentally incompatible with national loyalty, leading to a call for their effective removal.
A very stark vision, yes.
Wow. Savarkar's views were incredibly stark and, as you said, quite influential. It's a lot to take in, seeing how these historical interpretations from the British to these powerful nationalist figures have molded present-day tensions. So after all this, where does Misra's work suggest we go from here, looking at India's future?
Well, the Muslim question, framed as an identity-building issue, remains absolutely critical for India's future stability and cohesion. Our source material really emphasizes that societies prone to interreligious conflict need to consciously develop a language of inclusion, one that genuinely provides safety and security for all communities.
Which means confronting the past, honestly, right? Not just whitewashing it or picking convenient narratives.
Exactly that. Media, political parties, politicians, educational institutions, they all have a central, powerful role in shaping the national consciousness. Misra specifically suggests an honest and dispassionate representation of the history of Muslim rule in the textbooks to dispel anxieties and address historical grievances without bias.
Okay.
The text also points to the importance of emphasizing interfaith dialogue, recognizing commonalities between Hinduism and Islam, like those explored by the Bhakti movement and Sufism. But critically, without trying to force them into some single unified religion, that doesn't work.
So the core challenge really lies in moving past stereotypes, moving past these persistent accusations of disloyalty that can make Muslims feel like aliens in their own country.
Precisely. The heavy legacy of the past, that includes the disparaging attitude towards Muslim rule, the reluctance to accept Muslims as fellow citizens, and a general sense of fear of Islam among a substantial majority of Hindus, this continues to profoundly affect contemporary India. And this unfortunate confluence of factors has contributed to a majoritarian national identity that can and does marginalize minority communities.
So what really stands out to you from this whole complex history we've unpacked? We've seen how British colonial strategy, the evolving, sometimes conflicting philosophies of nationalist leaders, and these deeply held historical memories have all contributed to this intricate dance of identity and religion in India. The path forward, as our sources suggest, seems to lie in honest historical engagement, open dialogue, and a conscious, deliberate effort to build a true language of inclusion.
Yeah, I think this deep dive really makes us consider a crucial question, not just for India, but more broadly. How can a nation, one so rich in diverse histories and identities, reconcile its varied, often conflicting narratives to forge a genuinely shared future, a future that doesn't erase the unique experiences of any of its communities? It's a fundamental challenge, as I said, not unique to India, but one that every multi-religious, multi-ethnic society must confront if it wants to truly flourish. Definitely something powerful for you, the listener, to ponder as you reflect on what we've discussed today.